Boundaries are ways of teaching people how to love us. So it's basically you communicating what you're not comfortable with and what you are comfortable with.
The way I look at boundaries is it's about setting limits. Now, where they come from and why it's essential for mental health is in childhood, the child thinks everything is possible, and the parents are kind of like these gatekeepers of setting limits for the child so that the child doesn't injure themselves, put themselves in danger, do anything that would harm them in the future.
And I started like actually getting in and seeing that, when someone does something wrong, you can't just sulk and not tell them and be passive aggressive. You have to communicate, because that's where your boundaries coming down. So I had to learn along the way, and it wasn't easy. It was very uncomfortable, especially because when you have that trauma, you associate you communicating your feelings with somebody that's going to lose.
Leading to those signs of fatigue, those signs of burnout. And I find myself, I get very cranky and angry because I'm not feeling understood. And so communicating, setting boundaries, being clear about things, then allows you to be vulnerable and authentic.
Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nothembi Basson, aka The Rich Mogul, and today I'm joined by my wonderful co-host Mbongeni Dhliwayo. How are you?
Excellent, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So happy spring, guys. Happy spring.
Yes, and Happy New Year to the people who celebrate the New Year in September. Inzalo Yolana. And so, it's African New Year.
Exactly, and Mbongeni just taught me that today, so we learn every day. And so today we have a very interesting topic. We will be talking about boundaries, and we're just gonna get straight into it. So the first question is, what are boundaries and why are they essential for mental health? And I'll just start off by saying I think boundaries are ways of teaching people how to love us. So it's basically you communicating what you're not comfortable with and what you are comfortable with.
Yeah. So the way I look at boundaries is it's about setting limits. Now, where they come from and why it's essential for mental health is in childhood, the child thinks everything is possible, and the parents are kind of like these gatekeepers of setting limits for the child so that the child doesn't injure themselves, put themselves in danger, do anything that would harm them in the future. So that's where boundaries actually come from, is from our parenting and programming. And why it's important for mental health is because you have to then separate at some point where there's the self and then there's the rest of the world, and how much of the self can be experienced by the world. You set that boundary, and similarly how much of the world you let into affecting you, that's also a boundary that you have to set and maintain.
And I would say it's protecting your yourself and your emotional well-being when it comes to the mental health. And the second question would be, how do you establish healthy boundaries in relationships?
Okay, so the proto-relationship is the relationship of child and parent, and that then seeps into all your other relationships until you get to an age where you start to then have a better relationship with yourself first. Because you have to be able to respect the boundaries you set for yourself. Things like, if you gave yourself a task, do you honor yourself to keep that task? And that is why I then look at boundaries as self-love. Because if you can't set boundaries for yourself and then honor and respect those boundaries, how do you then set boundaries for other people and have them know to honor and respect those boundaries? And so, that's how I look at it in terms of setting boundaries for other people. Begins by us first having set boundaries for ourselves, maintaining those boundaries, communicating those boundaries, and then you set boundaries for other people, communicate that you've set the boundary, and then they hopefully will respect it.
Absolutely, 100%. I think it starts with communicating your boundaries clearly, and being
clear as mud.
Clear as mud, and being assertive, because a lot of times if we, like you're saying, when you come from childhood and if your boundaries were not, your needs were not met, or you didn't have a space to communicate what you're struggling with, you also struggle with that in our adult relationships or just our relationships in general. So it's also being assertive and being consistent, because a lot of times we'll say, okay, this is my boundary, and then when someone disrespects the boundary, we just let it slide, when that's where you're supposed to bring in the assertiveness and be like, no, I set this boundary and you didn't do this, so going forward, if you go against my boundary, we're done, like those type of vibes. And you need to communicate the boundary clearly, like you said, because a lot of times we don't know, we can't read minds, unfortunately.
100%. And then also I think that's where the mental health element then comes in, is because how often do we actually look at our boundaries and see whether or not we ourselves are keeping and maintaining those boundaries and being detail oriented?
Yeah.
Because we live in this fast-paced world, we let a lot of things slide, and by having that happen often, then other people see that and therefore they won't respect your boundary either.
Yeah.
And that's what creates toxicity, because no one wants to really sit and account every single day to themselves, and therefore other people don't expect that they would have to then account to other people. So if you are setting boundaries, you have to really communicate them, because some people don't even have that knowledge. And they don't do those practices of, really getting to know yourself, setting your own boundaries, and then, interacting with the world in that way.
Yeah, that's completely true. Because a lot of times, also people are more likely to disrespect your boundaries when they can see you don't disrespect when you don't respect yourself.
Yeah.
And it also shows up in small things, like constantly saying, oh, I'm gonna get healthy, or I'm gonna go to gym, and then you don't. Like being someone that you yourself can't rely on makes it projects into the other relationships, where it shows like, because you don't trust yourself, now you can't trust anyone else, basically.
Yeah, 100%. So and really at the base of it is these everyday things, even just physical well-being. If you're able to exercise and set boundaries for yourself in that area of physical health, that's where it all begins, in terms of self-love, building yourself. And then people see how consistent you are with that, and that's where they then start to realize, okay, so this person is a serious person, this person is diligent, this person is, and they're more likely to respect your boundaries, because people, basically, we evaluate other people, we suss you out and put you in a certain box, so to speak, and it's based on what they've observed of how you treat yourself and how you treat others in certain settings. Yeah.
Yes. That's why even those cliche, I always used to be like, oh, that's so cliche. But like, it's so true that if you don't love yourself, how do you expect anybody else to love you? That's so cute. And what would you say are some signs that show that your boundaries are being disrespected?
Well, the practice of checking in with yourself, how you spend time with yourself and process your mental health, is when you can then do a checkup of the boundaries that you've set for yourself and whether or not you're honoring those. But then also you start to then look at relationships. So it begins with the relationship itself, and then it goes into the major relationships of the people that you spend a lot of time with. So that's friends, family, whatever the case is. So if you're not doing an assessment of yourself, you're probably not then assessing other people, and you're letting your emotions dictate whether or not someone is not respecting your boundary. Spring, yeah. Hey, sorry. So I was saying that if we don't have an inner practice for us to check our own boundaries ourselves, then it becomes difficult to then assess the relationships with the key people around you, whether or not those people are respecting you, those people are showing up for you the way you would like them to, and if you had set any boundaries for them, how do they respond to those boundaries? It's letting you know how they respond and feel about you.
And I would say like signs that your boundaries are being disrespected would be like when you start to feel disrespected, or you start to feel taken advantage of, even if you don't feel like your feelings are being heard. Then that's like some of the signs that you can pick up because a lot of times we don't really know how to regulate our emotions, or we don't know exactly what emotions are. That's why a lot of times when people are angry, they associate it as a bad thing, when your anger is actually there to teach you that, oh, your boundaries have been disrespected, somebody has made you feel like you weren't heard, and that's why you're angry now. So it's like breaking down that part. So I would say that.
So how do you know that your boundaries are not being disrespected? One, having communicated them, how many times do you have to repeat the boundary? Because I like to look at everything as parenting. It's either you're parenting yourself, and how you parent yourself is how you will then parent other people. So how many times do you repeat a boundary before you then realize that this relationship is possibly not a healthy relationship and not a relationship you want to continue with, because you have to determine how important that boundary is for you. And once you've determined this is a very important boundary, you will constantly be watching it, and then that's how you end up cutting people off.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you are going to lose a lot of people in your life when you start practicing boundaries and start actually taking yourself seriously. And then that's okay, because then you realize those people will only, if someone reacts badly to your boundaries, it means that they were just benefiting from you not having any boundaries. So you'd rather just not have them in your life, especially if they're not willing to do better.
Yeah, 100%.
And what would I say? How do you communicate boundaries effectively?
So the conversations that you need to begin with intentionality. You have to be intentional about having a conversation about boundaries, and you have to make it clear to the other person what the boundary is and how you let them know that they've crossed it. So it's almost like the way that we set rules for children. You have a conversation, you sit this person down, you make sure that everything is very clear, and you have to approach it in a way where this person doesn't then feel attacked.
Yeah.
Because that happens a lot, especially when you're setting a boundary. So yeah, it's very important that you begin with expressing the intent to say, look, I need to have this conversation with you. I have certain feelings about certain things. You specify those things, and then you then say, this is the behavior, and I would like not to see this behavior, and this is how I'll determine whether I'm seeing the behavior or not, so that the person then knows and sees how you're evaluating. Because generally what happens when you set rules, people try and find the loopholes, and so you have to then be clear about, look, if you're going to be looking for loopholes, I am going to be checking to make sure that you're honoring this boundary, and that's then an effective communication of that boundary. Because if you just set a boundary but you don't say to the person, hey, this is a boundary I'm setting with you, oftentimes they'll just take it as information and carry on with their lives, not realizing they're supposed to calibrate how they then interact with you based on that information. Yeah.
That's so true. And yeah, 100%, I think you need to be very direct about what you want, and also be assertive, like stick to your boundary, and be specific, like you said also. So you can't just you can just also start off by like showing them that it's a conversation, because a lot of times, some of us, including myself, I always resort to anger or shouting. You're just like, no, you don't have to do that. You can, the birds are chirping. You don't have to do that. You can just have a conversation and be like, hey, I just didn't like when you spoke to me this way. Please just be mindful that, like, going forward, you should watch your tone, but don't shout at me. And yeah, like, you need to be direct, specific, and assertive, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of people think that things come naturally.
Yeah.
And that's the assumption that we have in this world right now. So that's why it's important to have that intentionality up front. Because, yeah, I was just thinking of something, but it's completely left with the birds.
I actually relate on that, because you're saying that it's something that is taught. Because even I, like in my household that we grew up, I wouldn't say that there was healthy communication, especially when it came to conflict. So it would always be shouting or fighting with words, but like not getting over the problem. Or even I remember like being in trouble and it wouldn't be addressed. Like maybe I'd get shouted at, or maybe bazongishaya, and then afterwards you don't talk about it, and then if they can see I'm angry, it will be like, oh, let's like make her feel better, but we never spoke about it. So then I carried that thing, especially into high school, when I started like actually getting friends and saying that, oh, when someone does something wrong, you can't just sulk and not tell them and be passive aggressive. You have to communicate, because that's where your boundaries come in now. So I had to learn along the way, and yeah, it wasn't easy. It was very uncomfortable, especially because when you have that trauma, you associate you communicating your feelings with somebody that's going to lose. Or what if they get angry at me? Like, oh, you don't care about what I'm doing, or you don't see what I'm doing, those type of things. Instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't notice I was doing that. Going forward, I won't do that. And you do get those people where it's like, oh, I wasn't asking for too much, I was just asking the wrong person. So I had to definitely learn that, and it is uncomfortable. And sometimes I do resort back to my old ways, but it's like a muscle. I would say you need to practice it the whole time.
Yes, 100%. And I think the main issue is we assume so much. We assume so much because of, as I said earlier, right, that there's so many things that people don't have time to be detail-oriented. And because we're not detail-oriented, we assume certain standards or certain human behavior is obvious for everyone.
Yeah.
So like there's this thing where people like saying, no, but we're all adults. As if that then communicates all the boundaries that come with what being an adult is. You see what I'm saying? So it's assumed that other people know certain things, and that's what creates a lot of conflict, because the conflicts are you trying to express this boundary and be specific for yourself, but then other people might feel like you're trying to make yourself special, when I was in Zanyona, you know, those kinds of things. And so you have to navigate around that to be able to actually have a person hear you about your boundary, what you're expressing, how you're expressing it. And it's important how you express it, because then they take it seriously or not.
Yes. Especially the approach and tone. The approach and tone is very important, because a lot of times I think, especially with having BPD, when I am angry or when you make me angry, like I will make sure that you know. And that's obviously something that if you want to have long-lasting relationships, that can't be your resort, because a lot of the times it's like you're just angry and you're saying things that you don't mean, even if maybe if there is a truth to it, but I can exaggerate. Like I'll be like, oh, you hate me, or you make me angry, and it's like, no, we just had a disagreement now, and I shouldn't put people in the position to feel like that for someone else to think that you hate me. Like I can just disagree without feeling like that. So I think a lot of the time it's your approach and your tone also, and for you to also evaluate and be like, am I exaggerating this? Does this person really hate me, or we just uncomfortable right now?
Yeah. Look, for me, when you speak about that, the thing that came to me is this idea of how to express yourself without having it be taken as a tantrum.
Yes.
So that's very important, because when you tantrum, then the other person also emotionally creates a block. And so if you were to communicate your boundary within a tantrum, it's very often that people will then only pay attention to the tantrum and not actually get the information in terms of what you were trying to communicate, what went wrong, and how to prevent it into the future. So yeah, that's a key thing that we have to realize, because we were talking earlier about a situation that you had, or a story where we'll have to edit this part, because I'm trying to remember this thing about passive-aggressive behavior.
Yeah.
Right? So passive-aggressive behavior is the tantrum.
Yeah.
That's you hiding the fact that you're communicating boundaries with all this other confusion, and you're hoping that because you assume that it's obvious to other people, whatever's going on for you, everyone else is seeing what's happening in your inner world. Mm-hmm. So that's why passive-aggressive people don't know that they're being passive-aggressive. They don't know that they want to communicate a boundary. And that not knowing is because generally mental health is not something that's fully taken seriously. Mm. Even this idea of what is self-love, people don't recognize that cleaning your house in terms of knowing who you are, why you are, and what your boundaries are, then communicating that to other people is all the housekeeping that is needed for your mental health.
Yes.
So literally living is mental health.
Yes, that's so true. And it's like you said, assuming. I always have this thing, also, because I think like I've always hated adults. That's a strong word, but I've always hated adults. But I don't hate them now. But like I've always had this hate for adults. Like, they're adults, but they're not doing better. And I always wanted to educate myself and would read like things that were beyond my years. So, and a lot of times when you go into the real world, you realize like, oh, there's so many adults who like haven't grown up. They're just broken children in adult bodies. And I'll just get so frustrated, like, ugh, if I can educate myself, how come an adult can't? Like, common sense is common. Why would you do that when I'll never do that to you? But it's like they didn't know also sometimes.
No, 100%. And there is no such thing as common sense. We're learning that more and more.
Common sense is not common.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I actually don't think there is common sense, because the culture, standards, practices, and norms have changed so much in a very short space of time that whatever you think is common sense, you can't have the guarantees that you might have had maybe 100 years ago, that everyone knows certain information, or has had access to certain experiences, knows what boundaries are. So even if you were to communicate a boundary with someone who doesn't have this level of mental health awareness, they won't hear you in terms of what you're trying to say.
Mm-hmm. So
these words may convey specific meanings to some people, but that depends on their level of awareness as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've never heard of boundaries, I'm thinking of a wall.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, oh, so you're trying to keep me separate from you.
Yes.
So you're breaking the relationship. And people then have an emotional reaction to you setting a boundary instead of them hearing what the boundary is.
Yes. Because I even at some point just think like, oh, this is me being selfish. How can I do that? Just care about me and not care about like these people who can't help themselves. But yeah.
And so even with empathy, like how much empathy is too much empathy? Mm-hmm. And the answering of such questions is how you then begin to realize where and when you need to engage boundaries, because you could find yourself dealing with other people's problems and making them your own, and also other people making their problems and expecting that you would make their problems like our problems. All of that becomes very important that we have very clear communication. And communication is not something that's actually really focused on and taught. Because again, it's one of these things that's assumed. It's assumed that we all know how to communicate. Mm-hmm. But actually, a lot of people don't. They don't know what assertiveness is, because they might think of that as...
Or they think it's rude.
It's being rude, yeah.
Especially like sorry to cut you off, especially like in black communities, if you're a woman and you're assertive and you like don't succumb to the patriarchy, you're seen as rude or like, yo, nangulo,
exactly, yeah.
I was told gifunde kakhulu.
Yes, and look, there's this thing now where people are saying that you must leave your education at the door.
Yeah.
And how is a person expected to have good mental health when they're supposed to divorce themselves? So literally, if someone is saying to you that you're supposed to leave a certain part of yourself out of this conversation or that conversation, that's a person who doesn't love you, loves the role that you play, but doesn't understand who you are and wants to strip away certain parts of your identity. And you have to then set boundaries with such people.
Yes, that is true. And what should you do if someone doesn't respect your boundaries?
Well, the immediate thought that is kind of like out there right now is, oh, get rid of toxic people, goodbye toxic people. And not always is it possible to cut someone off.
Yeah.
For example, children, probably when I was growing up, I definitely had a period of time where I had a packed bag. Like, I just had it because in my mind I was like, there will be a day where I'm gonna want to run away. So this bag must be ready. Because
that's so real.
That's how powerless children are within a home, right? Where you've tried to communicate this thing, it's not coming across, so the only thing is to avoid, right? And if you can't avoid, because like you're living in a home, there are only so many rooms, you can't always be getting out of a room when someone comes in or whatever the case is. So that's where that clear communication comes in, to be able to break through to this person in a way that they, one, understand what you're saying. And if you want to make sure that they understand what you're saying, you need to then start practices of playback techniques, where when they speak, repeat what they say, so that you're clarifying that, did I understand you correctly? And what you're hoping is that then they would then also play back certain things, so that then in their own words, in their own understanding, have they then taken that feedback and are they incorporating it into their own nature. So if you don't do that playback technique, that's probably one of the main reasons why people won't then respect your boundary, because they never internalized it. You didn't make sure that they internalized it. Yeah.
Yes, and it comes in with the active listening now.
Yes.
Like you actually engage in the conversation. A lot of times so many of us are dissociating because we're addicted to our phones. There always needs to be music, but like you need to actively listen to people and make sure that you understand what they're saying, and also ask if you don't know. Like, so yeah, that's good. And I would also say, obviously, like there is this toxic culture of just cutting off people and like giving up on people. And sometimes you just need to gauge, like be able to discern and comprehend the situation and be like, okay, maybe they don't get it now. Let's just leave it for now and explain another time. Like there are some situations where you don't have to cut people off, especially if they're not bad people or harmful towards you, and you can see they're trying but they just don't understand. Maybe then you need to change your approach. And I think also what helps also a lot of times when we want to set boundaries is just because we do it sometimes in relationships, but we need to like do it all around, where you like can compliment someone else, like positive reinforcement. Like start off with something that you like that they're doing, and then afterwards be like, okay, but I just want to touch on this quickly, etc. So it's not like just a negative conversation, because a lot of times when it's boundaries, it becomes a negative conversation where it's easy to become an argument. And what else? And eventually, if the person is not respecting your boundaries and like taking them seriously, unfortunately, you will have to cut some people off.
Yeah.
And distance yourself, or maybe not cut them off, but distance yourself. And also that can be a boundary within itself, to be like, okay, you know what, this person is not happy for me. I'm not gonna be mean to them, but I'll just be cordial.
Yeah.
Or I'm just gonna engage but not participate, not engage. Unfortunately, you would have to do that.
Yeah. No, and then when you spoke about addictions and things like that, it's also very important to do boundary setting conversations. So, because I don't know why, but a lot of people will dismiss anything that you say if you're in a certain state.
Yes.
So it's also quite a thing where I guess, you know, life, a lot of people spend a lot of time socializing, whatever, and you're in a setting where there will be drinks and things like that. So it becomes difficult to separate the serious conversations from the non-serious conversations. So one of the ways is to have conversations earlier in the day. I find, particularly with older people, if you want to communicate something and they're tired, they will hear you, but it's not going to internalize. And so that's where you then start getting frustrated that you're setting this boundary and this person is disrespecting you, but maybe you needed to have the conversation sober in the morning and be very clear about what you're saying, and then the person might be able to internalize it.
Yes, that's good. That's true. Sorry. But yeah, that is good. Sure. I haven't actually thought of that. Where are we? How do you balance self-care with caring for others?
Yeah, well, I think empathy is a neutral term that would apply in both situations, right? So you empathize with yourself. Are you able to empathize with yourself? Do you recognize what drives your mood swings, as an example? So a lot of people get angry because you're hungry, and so that's something that if you can observe in yourself, then you should also be able to observe in other people. Similarly, with everything, if you don't have the awareness of something, then you can't see it in other people. It's almost like if you're illiterate of mental health conversation, the words and meanings, the vocabulary, then you're going out blind So you have to first learn, grow, and know these things, and then you can teach other people that as well. So that's where this idea of being able to empathize with yourself, have a strong, good relationship with yourself, don't be toxic with yourself, then you're able to have healthy relationships with other people, with healthy communication and clear boundaries.
Absolutely.
And then also not trying to make change overnight. Expecting overnight change is also you being unrealistic. It's like when we're talking about exaggerating. So don't exaggerate how much change you're going to effect with the one conversation that you're having. Don't expect it to change the world, because that's also it's also a problem.
That's so real. And I would say like also what was the question?
It's about self-love.
Balancing self-care with caring for others.
Yes.
I think also you just taking care of yourself puts you in the position where you are able to care for other people. So like a lot of times when I was people pleasing or whatever, I would feel extremely drained, and I wasn't in a happy place. But when I started setting boundaries and people started respecting my boundaries, it felt like empowering and felt like, oh, now I am getting the opportunity to love and to be loved in the manner in which I want, not in the way that I thought the world wants it to be. So I think taking care of yourself is also taking care of other people initially. Because even sometimes you just loving yourself can be motivational. You get those people, you're like, oh, this person takes care of themselves, they love themselves. That is self-care. That's why they're able to care for other people. It's because they know what is taking care of themselves.
No, 100%. And I think the thing about self-love is it has to be contagious. If you are loving yourself and being good to yourself, the fruits, so to speak, must be you then loving other people and being good to other people, and people beginning to recognize that. Yes. So if there's one of those two sides are not balanced, then that's possibly a sign that there's a mental health issue there. Because if you on the inside are a happy person, you're in a happy space, but then when you go out into the world, that's why people then put on masks. Yes. Because you are protecting yourself from the world. You're creating a boundary that says, this is the version of myself that I'm comfortable with showing you, because you are not ready or in a space where you can then participate in a more vulnerable version of myself. And slowly, as people then build those relationships, you open up and become more and more vulnerable, and you show them more transparency and expect more transparency from them as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. This is good, Sana. And because I even forgot what you said as well, because of the bread. My thoughts.
I feel sorry for the editors.
Sana, sorry to you. So what were we at 6? Yeah, we're done with that.
Yeah.
And then now we're going to 7. What role do boundaries play in preventing burnout?
Predictable things are easier to manage than unpredictable things.
Yeah.
And so that's why setting boundaries makes your world, yourself, and other people more predictable. And so that's less mental load, it's less labor to figure out. Because if you're living in a world of uncertainty, then there's high levels of anxiety because you don't know what could possibly happen. You're preparing for multiple scenarios. Whereas when there's clarity, particularly brought by boundaries, you can let that armor down because the boundaries doing the work, not you. Whereas if there are no boundaries, then it's you who's having to do the work of keeping yourself safe. You can't trust that the boundary will be respected and understood or all of that stuff. So you're keeping it in you. And if you're keeping it in you, then that's what creates the stress, that's what creates burnout, because you are literally carrying the whole world on your shoulders, so to speak.
Absolutely. And if you're just dilly-dallying, like, it's just gonna be, you just gotta go down with it. So for instance, boundaries prevent burnout because, like you said, it's like almost like you're planning now. So if something does happen, then it's out of your control. For example, when I used to work night shift, I used to work from 1 a.m. to 9 a.m., right? And travel for 2 hours, but like 1 hour going, 1 hour coming back. So the first day I went, I slept at like 8 o'clock, and then I went and I was like, yo, I'm so tired, like I couldn't stay up. So I'm like, okay, now boundary, I need to set a sleeping routine every day to make sure that I get 8 hours of sleep, and then I set that boundary for me so that I was never tired at work, like those type of things. And like, we're all busy, we get tired, but you also need to have communication with your friends or reach out to other people. Anyway, you can go through isolation period, but there's also sometimes where someone's gonna be like, hey, can I call? I miss you. You can be like, oh, I'm tired. We can maybe call for an hour, 30 minutes, or maybe let's call on Friday. Can't call today, see you then. Like those type of boundaries that actually help you. It's like not saying no, but you also like putting effort and time into other things, but you need to also be strict with yourself. Because I mean, imagine coming home and then you have to sleep at 2 p.m. That's boring, but I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna be tired at work.
Yeah.
So I think that's how it prevents burnout, and also just not allowing everyone to have access to. You need to pick and choose and be very, very selective with your energy, because energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transferred. So yeah, I think those boundaries help protect us.
Yeah, and wherever there's clarity, there's more possibility for happiness.
Yeah.
So that's why confusion, assumptions, all of those things, they lead to stress. They actually create stress because you're calculating a lot more, and that's why it's like a mental work. Whereas if you're in an environment where you trust people, you're not in a situation where you're guarding, where's my phone, did I leave that, you know? So it's all of those things. I don't think we fully understand the brain as a human machine, and so mental health is a very important way of making sure, I mean, like setting boundaries. It makes sure that your brain functions in a healthy way, so that it's doing only what it needs to do, not doing more, and also it's not like completely unengaged and doing too little, which would be leading to those signs of fatigue, those signs of burnout. And I find myself, I get very cranky and angry because I'm not feeling understood. And so communicating, setting boundaries, being clear about things, then allows you to be vulnerable and authentic.
Yes. And I also struggle with that of not being understood. How do you set boundaries with toxic or manipulative people?
Record it. No, I'm kidding. But sometimes, unfortunately, there are people who will twist things, and so having a hard record of it, like some kind of text exchange, helps, because then you can screenshot and say, but remember. But it's generally then it feels it's a bit more of a violent approach, because people then become defensive and feel like, oh, so you're recording me, you're spying on me, you're then triggering them into a spiral of paranoia. But unfortunately, the only way is to slowly, depending on who the person is and what their relationship is, the only way is to slowly parent them out of it. And so that's where this thing of constantly reminding them about what they have said and what you have said, doing the playback technique so that they start doing the playback technique, and then later on referring to those things to say, no, but remember you said this. This is how you said you understood it. And that's where slowly you're hoping, because you can't control other people's free will, but you are hoping that they seeing you have integrity will then also make them at least have integrity around you.
Yeah, I agree. I think you just need to be firm and clear, especially when it comes to toxic or manipulative people. They're going to try to gaslight you. They're going to try to make you think they're right. So stand on business and don't fold. Period.
And consistency. So another thing that maybe gets toxic people like mischaracterized. A lot of people who are toxic might not be toxic because they have bad intent, right? Ignorance, not knowing, can also cause harm. And so that's why it's very important that you do this thing of slowly conscientizing people by being an example. So it's like this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine so that you see how the light works, and hopefully you can then start to bring out the light in you as well. That's particularly with like toxic people and things like that. They don't even know that they're toxic. Manipulative people don't know that they're manipulative. So you have to find a way around their defenses, show them some vulnerability. Then as they show you vulnerability, that's when you then begin to clarify certain things, and hopefully you're having a healthy conversation with that person. Because they're not always going to be manipulative. They're not always going to be, and you also have to feed them a growth mindset. So it's difficult, particularly to communicate boundaries with people that don't have a growth mindset. So they're just thinking, so then it means I'm bad, and this boundary is going to keep me out of your life forever. It's not necessarily that way, because you have to first empathize with that person and say, look, I'm on a journey, and this journey has led me down this path. If you begin this journey, then eventually you will grow into these things and you won't even notice these boundaries.
That is true. I absolutely agree, because now I didn't at some point, but I was actually a teenager, so I need to give. Sometimes you aren't a bad person, you're just 15. But I had like a lot of manipulative traits, and I think, and people pleasing also is also manipulation in another way. So I think I had those traits, but I had to grow out of it, and the only way I could grow out of it is by people who loved me telling me that, you're actually manipulative, or you are a people pleaser. So I could recognize that in myself and fix it. But otherwise, I assumed that was okay and that was right.
Yeah, so someone mentioned, I had a conversation recently, and I'm a person who really tries to emphasize truth as a value. And the person then pointed out that what makes me toxic about this truth thing is I leave out the love. So truth and love need to go together. So yes, I'm telling you the truth, but it doesn't mean I must use that sword of truth and cut you. If I'm then applying truth and love, then that's how people then grow. That's how you are able to spread the light instead of getting into a cycle of violence. Because not necessarily physical violence, but even just verbal violence of you are wrong, you keep disrespecting my boundaries, that can be interpreted as combative behavior, and that leads then to a person being defensive. So that's where you have to pair the love. You give them the stick, but you also give them the sweet.
And that's also like, we would say it's a muscle that you have to practice, because I struggle with that. I think that I am working on it, but I wish it could just be faster, like you said, but it's been a while now, and I need to focus on that muscle, because I don't have patience, especially once I feel like you've done me wrong, or once I feel like, especially I'm a principled person, but sometimes it's also the love, the person is not aware, but I'm a principled person, where I'm like, if I would never do that to you, and you did that to me, you trifling.
And labeling people then makes them take those labels and behave like that. So that's why you have to model good behavior, you have to model good communication, and hopefully that rubs off. Because at the end of the day, there is such a thing as vibes, there is such a thing as birds of a feather flock together. So principled people find principled people, and also toxic people. I think that's where families become complicated, because now we're all bound together by nature, not necessarily by the similarities or differences in our experience and things like that. So that's, I don't know
But that's where it can be very toxic, especially when it's family, because now there's mostly a lack of boundaries, and sometimes we don't know generally how to be people, as we just never had time for mental health. We've just always been constantly working, and there's just constantly no time for us to check in historically. So these are the conversations that we need to be having very if we want to.
And I think people have this thing where they associate mental health with privilege. But if you're able to have alone time, that is privilege, and everyone of every class can have alone time and can then create boundaries around that alone time and by doing that, then teaching and showing and modeling for other people that, oh, okay, so everyone does deserve a certain level of privacy. Everyone does deserve a certain level of alone time, so to speak. And with that, that's when people are supposed to be able to then start to process and deal with their mental health. But if now we're constantly all in each other's space, this idea that, no, but we're family, so I can eat in your plate, I can, if people don't have that sense of mine, then they retreat and they can only be safe on the inside.
Yes,
yeah,
that's true. And what should you do if you feel guilty about setting boundaries?
I think process that, because if you interpret boundaries as self-love, you shouldn't ever regret setting a boundary. You should, maybe what could make you regret is how you set the boundary, how you communicate it. But the boundary itself, you need to understand that that's literally the scaffolding of who you are, and you can't be you without those boundaries. You can't be you without that clarity. And so, yeah, if you're feeling bad about having set a boundary, you probably need more time to process what's going on. Why do I now feel pressured to not love myself? Because it's a choice, right? We choose in every moment, are we loving ourselves, or are we now making a sacrifice so that we can do this thing for this other person? But as you make those exceptions, then be careful, because that's then creating a loophole for people to then go around that boundary by using that loophole more and more. So yeah, because that's even just like in family, they do use a lot of like guilt triggers and shame triggers to get you to behave in certain ways, which you then
feel good.
Yeah, feel good too.
Yeah. And there's even a quote that I recently read that I absolutely love, where it's like, and the worst sin of it all at the end is that you destroyed yourself for nothing. So, like you said, a boundary is you teaching people how to love you. It's not supposed to be a violent thing, and you're not supposed to feel guilty about it. And if people do make you feel guilty about it, then maybe those aren't the right people for you. Because yeah, boundaries are necessary for your well-being, and you are necessary for your well-being. So you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself, and that is what boundaries are. And now, what should you do if your boundaries are constantly disrespected?
So first understand yourself and what you did and how you participated in creating. If it's not communicated, then maybe there are assumptions at play. So you need to understand within yourself what is happening and what you think is why it's happening. So spend some time alone, process it. Then confront this person. And when you confront this person, the word confront already, that's confrontational. So you have to do what we spoke about earlier, where you mix some compliment up front, you get this person to lower their guard. Because if the guard is up, then the communication is not going to get through. But it really begins with you. Because if you're not able to point the finger at yourself and say, what about me is leading to this? Then if you're being defensive about that question, then yeah, there's no point in confronting other people about it first. You have to first deal with yourself and then be able to deal with other people.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I think if it's a constant cycle that's recurring, like a specific situation, like, or that specific boundary, then yeah, you need to check in with yourself, because we can't say, no, I'm not victim blaming anything, but a lot of times we can say, oh, this was done to me, this was done to me, but also acknowledge the role that you play sometimes in your hurt. So I think you need to check in with yourself and be like, okay, I've tried this, what am I doing? What is going on here?
Yeah, so unfortunately a lot of people are much more clear about expectations without being clear about the other side of it, which is then the responsibilities, right? So everyone knows their rights is something that, I mean, in the culture we all talk about, right? So that's the expectations, and that's when people become entitled, because you think that the right doesn't come with the other side of the coin being the responsibilities to be able to access that right. So if you didn't register, you can't vote. It's not automatic that every single person can just show up to the polls, right? So similarly, whatever rules you've set for yourself, you have to then behave in those ways consistently going forward.
Yeah, I think so too. And how do you set boundaries with family members?
Yeah, this is the challenging one, but it all begins inside. If you are able to find within yourself what is that inner voice and the inner critic, and you're able to put those voices away, so to speak, or to disarm them, that's how you're supposed to speak to family as well. So you can't do it if you haven't done the inner work. Because if you haven't spoken to yourself, changed yourself, dealt with the ugliest or most stubborn parts of yourself, then you won't be ready to deal with the stubbornness and ugliness that you're going to get from people that you love, people around you, your family. So that's why it's important that you start with the inner work, having conversations with yourself, using healthy communication with yourself. If you're having thoughts that are throwing negativity at you, if you don't deal with that, you can't deal with the negative person, because that negative person is going to still have the same dynamic of this negativity within you.
Yeah, that's so.
So if the inner stubbornness is out there.
That's true. But I think honestly you need to do it clearly and respectfully, obviously, because especially when elders are involved or there's like an age gap and you are like younger or whatever, or just in family, I think there needs to be respect at all times, but you also need to be clear about like if this is a no-go for you, because even just because of that, I've went no contact with a lot of family members, and that might also happen as well, but that's okay, because especially if someone is toxic and really harmful, I'm not going to deal with that. Like, I'm not going to deal with homophobia, racism. Those are just certain things where if I've communicated, just because you're family, like, you can keep that side.
Yeah. So the thing about this whole thing is we have too much expectations of other people. And why I say that is because did you do that inner work of knowing how to empathize with the parts of yourself that you don't want to communicate, or whatever the case is, right? So that you're then able to use that playbook out there in the world. If you don't know your triggers, then you can't empathize with the other person, know their triggers, and therefore, if you navigate past their triggers, you can get through to them. Yeah. However, the problem is like when you're talking about talking to older people, that if one of their triggers is respect, right, and you just run roughshod over it and you're speaking however so then that person is got kola.
Yeah.
And therefore they're not, right. And so now they can't hear anything you're saying. And so that's why it's important that you do the work, identify your triggers. How do I get triggered? So that then you apply that to other people and say, oh, okay, so I need to communicate this to this person. Is this message negative or positive? It's negative, therefore it's going to be a much more difficult conversation. And can you see the level of detail that goes into being able to build a mental health castle for yourself? And then take that castle and then be able to now relate with people in a way that enables them to see that they also have an inner castle and how they can maintain that castle, so to speak. So really and truly, if you're not mining within, you won't be able to get across to other people and make them understand.
Yeah. And what should you do if you feel overwhelmed by others' demands?
Set a boundary. It's the simple short answer, but generally, understanding is the name of the game in terms of if people are being demanding, you have to read the room and read beyond certain lines to find out, okay, so what's the real core need and how can I meet it consistently without it being too much for me, right? And so, yeah, I think that's how you go around it. Yeah, but I think this one I have to think about a bit more.
But I agree with what you're saying, set a boundary and be like prioritize your own needs and also set like realistic limits. So like I said, if someone's saying you can, but if you're working, and someone's saying like, oh, can we call? You can be like, oh, came back from work, so I'm really tired. We can go for 30 minutes, or we can go for 15 minutes. Or sometimes, like I have a lot of friends who do that. I'm studying, but we can go for 15 minutes. Or if someone says, let's go clubbing. Oh, I'm not really in the right frame of mind for clubbing now, but maybe let's do a one-on-one picnic. Like, you can acknowledge what the person is saying, and you can empathize, like you say, and also find a solution. But make sure that the solution is now beneficial to you, or like everybody wins. Like,
yes, and that's another thing completely weird. The only way you're gonna win your inner battles is with a win-win mindset, because there's no part of you that wants to lose. And I think that's how love works, is win-win, in the sense that you have to find a way of calming yourself, and then you can then calm other people as well, because now you understand that I'm trying to focus on the good and lead to something good. And where people get triggered is because they feel like you're emphasizing on the bad.
yes.
And so then it leads to something bad.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. And how? I don't know if we should do this. How do you set, Joanna? How do you set boundaries on social media?
You should probably do how do you set boundaries on social media, and I think I'm starting to feel like I'm a broken record. It starts with yourself. It starts with you, in the sense that you are the one who logged in to this app. You're the one who volunteered that opinion. You're the one who liked or shared, or whatever the case is. And so you need to be very intentional about your use of social media. Otherwise, then the people on social media won't be able to influence you, right? If you're not clear on what the goal is, what the times that you're going to be on social media is, all of those things. If you don't have an inner scaffolding, then people will lead you and use emotions to sway you in either direction, or whatever the case is, right? So the one thing is, for example, do you engage with trolls? That's a decision that you should have already made before you met the troll, right?
Yeah.
So get your house in order, because now if you choose to engage with the troll, again, how are you communicating? Are you inflaming this person and throwing more triggers at them? Because that's the entertainment of trolls, right? Is what's entertaining about this whole thing of, oh, people are so toxic online. No, it's because they know that there are these words that are triggers, and so they try and load as many triggers as possible so they can get an explosion, right? And so you need to understand what are your triggers, and therefore how, as soon as that trigger comes up, do you choose to respond? Because you can then find yourself in a loop where now it's now all emotions that are riding, and you're no longer even involved in deciding.
Yes. And I think after that's like 100%, and you need to be like obviously mindful, like you say. Like when I had like where social media was making me depressed, we need to also remember that we're in charge of our algorithms. So I started like changing it to things that I like books or therapy or psychology. So now it's like when I go on there, it's not like being unproductive necessarily. You need to be watching things that you actually like, and I'm learning at the same time. So you need to be mindful of what you're doing and your interactions as well. Don't interact with trolls. That's what they want. You're just giving them engagement. Like a lot of times, I think also with social media, we feel like we need to reply to everything and stand up to everything, when it's like if you dislike something, you can just go on. Because a lot of times we go to racists and engage with them, and it's like you're just giving them engagement, just ignore them.
Yeah, 100%. And also there's parental settings. So knowing and understanding what are the terms and conditions. I mean, no one reads these terms and conditions, but there is that settings page. At least understand each of your apps. Understand how those settings pages work, what you can switch on and what you can't switch off. So for me, how I set my boundaries is there's very few apps that give me notifications, because I've noticed that when I was like posting a lot, then all the notifications would bring me back to the app. And so now, literally, they keep asking, do you want to switch notifications on? That's my boundary. So every time I say no, I'm not getting annoyed and saying, okay, yes, so that this thing stops asking. That's how mental health then, even in the realm of social media, if you're not going to be able to put that barrier up. So it's like with Spotify, I think it's Spotify, right? Spotify, when you're on the free version, literally constantly is telling you subscribe. So you have to have the conversation with yourself. Is this music worth it? When every single time I'm being constantly reminded of how there's this premium that I'm supposed to upgrade to. What is that doing to you? And so I have left Spotify because I was like, look, one, I'm not gonna go premium because of your pressure. So I'd rather leave that environment completely. You know what I mean? Because I just don't need you to constantly be like,
or trying to convince you to like buy more. That's the thing about social media. It's constantly trying to make you live with more than you actually need. And that's why these boundaries are important, to be like, no, actually, do I need premium? No, I don't. Just go to another app or set a time limit. Okay, if you're going to be on your phone for 8 hours every day and like sleep, then set a time limit, like those things. It's about you being proactive about your own health, because this is your life and you're the main character. So we can just sit here and say all of these things, but as long as if you don't want to do it, then nothing's going to happen.
And that not wanting to do it is, if you approach self-love as labor, then already you have a self-love problem. Whereas if you look at it as, I am improving my house, I am improving my life, I am being better to the people around me by making sure that I have at least made sure my cup is not half empty. By filling your own cup, you'll show up better in the world. So similarly with the apps and all of these things, they're constantly bombarding you with all of these things that are triggering you to be like, upgrade to this, watch this new video, oh, there's this thing that's trending, go and check it out. So if you don't have your stuff in order, you will be pulled in all those directions until you do the labor of first realizing, okay, so why am I here? How am I being intentional about my social media presence? Then you go to each of the apps and you give each of those apps that labor where you figure out, how do I set limits in terms of time? How do I change my algorithm by liking videos that I want to see instead of engaging with negativity? All of those things. It's from within going out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we need to stop giving social media the power that we give it over our lives.
It's phones in general.
Yeah, phones in general. That's why we have kids who can't read now. So, yeah.
Yes.
And but even we saying these things, and trust us, we also human. I also struggle with being on my phone. Like, one thing about me, my advice is series. I'll watch series from it's bad. So it's in different ways where we are basically succumbing to these addictions, but it comes back to discipline and not seeing it as a task. And also, I like what you said about being nice to others. A lot of times we're such great friends to everybody else, or such great partners, but when it comes to yourself, you don't even apply that. So for me, I always ask myself, like, hello, if I can love other people, what about like loving myself? And also asking yourself sometimes if you're struggling with, I don't know, discernment, or if you're struggling with boundaries, just ask yourself, like, when I'm doing this, do I love myself? And if the answer is no, then don't do it.
Look, and it's very, very difficult because, particularly looking at the way that we've been programmed, this idea that the word selfish, right? It's got so many triggers around it that make you then feel like, oh, me time is being selfish. I'm denying people the support and love and whatever. Particularly, I think mothers feel that pressure the most or whatever. So you have to realize that it's to show up for them properly, you need to have showed up for yourself properly. And unfortunately, you can't avoid that labor, because nothing that's worth doing and nothing that lasts long is easy to do, right? So that emotional labor that you have to do on yourself is actually quite difficult. It's quite involved. You have to be consistent. You have to be persistent about it. Have discipline around it. Even schedule it into your life so that you're able to do it. And as you do that, you become a better person all around, because the light that's within it will eventually shine out.
That's true. And especially if, like, at first it might be hard, you might lose a lot of people, it might get lonely, you might feel isolated, but it's as soon as you become consistent, everything else is gonna start like falling into place. And even with your boundaries, you can have it stacked. Start with small things. Like, don't just like Mbongeni said, it's not gonna be like in a week now you're gonna be healed or it's gonna get better. It starts with like the small things. So I would start habit stacking, like, oh, I'm gonna make sure every day when I get home I have to sleep at least for the first 5 days. Then afterwards you're gonna say, now every day when I get home I have to sleep and more for the next 5 days. Then it's gonna be like, oh, now I have to add the dishes. That's how I started getting myself into the habit of cleaning, where eventually now I could clean the whole house and it's done first because I habit stacked. I took time with myself. Like, even at some point I was busy making a crazy list of things of my weekly routine. And my uncle was like, girl, no, like, just say once a week, once a month I'm gonna do a podcast video, not like twice a week after you haven't been doing. So you need to have it stacked. Or I'm gonna run at least once a week for 30 minutes. Like, I started doing those small things, and eventually they grow and they start, like, because you start trusting yourself if you're consistent, and then you start doing more because now you can trust yourself. Because think about it, if you constantly say, oh, I'm gonna gym tomorrow, or I'm gonna shoot the podcast tomorrow, then you don't. You teach yourself not to trust yourself the same way you wouldn't trust a friend who does that. So it all starts with you being consistent. Or even saying like, oh, I'm gonna make sure I brush my teeth every night before I sleep. Start with small things today. And yeah, you have it set.
100%. And you sound a lot like my therapist in terms of set the bar on the floor if you have to.
Exactly.
Set the bar on the floor if you have to, because that is self-love. Make it easy.
Yeah.
Children did not come out of the womb and start walking.
Yes.
They first had to learn to sit up. They had to build their backbone and then learn to crawl and then learn to walk. So you literally put the bar on the floor if you have to. But the key is, what you want is not to make the task difficult, but to be consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we are gonna
plug the brand, Libra Athletic. Just check them out, guys. They're on Instagram as well. They do hikes, wellness, gymming, and there's also merch. So support Libra Athletic. Do you have a book of the week?
I don't know if I've mentioned. You see, I need to actually check my books of the weeks, but I don't know if I've mentioned the Quiet Violence of June.
Yes.
I have.
But to me, I don't know if it's in any of the videos.
Because that would be nice also. Okay, I think the book of the week is going to be Promise. I forgot the name of the author, but we're going to insert the book here, type of thing. Yeah. And yeah, thank you guys so much. We've made it to 162 subscribers currently. I don't know where we'll be when you guys watch this, because a lot of people are saying, oh, we're already 162. It's because we're working, guys. So by the time you watch it, it's been sometimes weeks that we've recorded. So yeah. Thank you guys so much for the support. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Thank you, Mbongeni. Thank you, Kiapo Media. And yeah, thank you to our team, Neo the Cloud Eater also. Thank you guys so much for watching.
It's okay, these things happen. And thank you for having this space, because I genuinely believe that you were sent to do this work.
Yes.
And not being shy to put your challenges out there.
Yes.
Heals you, but also is healing other people out there as well. So thank you very much for sharing your light with us.
You're most welcome. And thank you also to the people who supply us with where we can, shout out Dorothy and Cooks, where we can record. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Bye for now.